the meditation be acceptable in thy sight. Wilt thou teach me? Wilt thou teach me? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth in heaven. Give us this day and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Hallelujah. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, President Ronald Reagan, from Sister Kristen Byrd.
Good evening to all of my Christian friends. Tonight I want to share with you the words of Ronald Reagan after he was shot during his reign as president. Then I want to share with you information that asks, is America one nation under God? Please take note of America today and see how this nation is moving, and perhaps you can tell me what a Christian does. As Christians, we can pray that the light of God will guide us and lead us to a greater America. Ronald Wilson Reagan served 2 terms as the 40th president of these great United States. This actor turned politician faced many challenges while in office. The most trying and humbling was perhaps his close encounter with death when the president, his press secretary, and 2 members of his protective detail were shot. By the grace of God, the bullet narrowly missed the president's heart and was lodged into his lung. After a 2-week recovery, President Reagan returned to the White House and resumed writing in his presidential diaries. It was April 11th, 1981, and he wrote, "Whatever happens now, I owe life to God and will try to serve him in every way I can. Getting shot hurts. Still, my fear was growing because no matter how hard I tried to breathe, it seemed I was getting less and less air. I focused on the tiled ceiling and prayed, but I realized that I couldn't ask God for help, while at the same time I felt hatred for the mixed-up young man who had shot me. Isn't that the meaning of the lost sheep? We're all God's children, and therefore equally loved by him. I began to pray for his soul and that he would find his way back to the fold. Essayist Chuck Donovan said, "The ready forgiveness for John Hinckley and a prayer for his spiritual recovery were quintessential Reagan." The Friday after his return to the White House was Good Friday, and he notes in the diary a conversation that he had with Billy Graham, who told the president that he knew the Hinckley family and that they were decent, deeply religious people who were completely crushed by the sickness of their son. Reagan's empathy was boundless. Donovan also said that the faith of Ronald Reagan was evident in both his deeds and his words, as anyone who had ever had the honor to work with him rapidly realized. His faith had all the characteristics of a lived Christianity in the 20th century America. It was in his bloodstream, born of a deep familiarity with the Bible, a natural acceptance that God was the author of freedom, and a belief that our nation had enjoyed unique blessings from God. In speech after speech and policy after policy, Reagan displayed not a theologian's sifter, but an informed Christian's understanding of the eternal struggle between good and evil, and the centrality of this struggle in human affairs. On July 28, 1988, exactly 1 month to the day before I was born, President Reagan spoke to an overwhelmingly large crowd of high school students known as a student congress. His subject was evangelism. While his remarks are nearly 25 years old, just as the Bible, they ring true today. President Reagan's speech read like this: "When I consider the history of this nation, I'm struck by how deeply imbued with faith the American people were, even from the very first. Many of the settlers came for the express purpose of worshiping in freedom. Historian Samuel Morrison wrote of one such group: doubting nothing and fearing no man, they undertook all to set all crook ways straight and create a heaven and a new earth. And they were not permitted to do that in England. They would find some other place to establish their city of God." Well, that place was broad and open, and the land we call America. The debates over independence and the records of the Constitutional Convention make it clear that the Founding Fathers were sustained by their faith in God. In the Declaration of Independence itself, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." And it was George Washington who said, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports." Well, later, the statesmen gathered in Philadelphia to write what would become our Constitution. They often found themselves at odds, their purpose lost in acrimony and self-interest, until Benjamin Franklin stood one day and said, "I have lived a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men, and if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid?" And then he called that the Constitutional Convention to open each day with a prayer, which it did. During the Civil War, perhaps one of our nation's darkest hours, Abraham Lincoln said, "I have been driven many times to my knees by the conviction that I have nowhere else to go." Well, during the civil rights struggles of the 50s and the early 60s, millions worked for equality in the name of their creator. Civil rights leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King based all their efforts on the truth that, black or white, each of us is a child of God. And they stirred our nations to the very depths of its soul. President Reagan continued to say, And overwhelmingly, 9 out of 10 Americans pray. Audiences for religious books are growing. The modern communications media are being used for evangelism. Just consider, for example, the videotapes made by Youth of Christ, or the wonderful programming on a new cable channel called Eternal Word Television, a channel started by a woman of immense determination and joy, a nun called Mother Angelica. I was struck when reading a while back. I came across this quotation from Harvard theologian Harvey Cox. Rather than the cynical careerist types who supposedly have filled the campuses, I see young people who are intensely interested in moral issues, in religious histories and beliefs. President Reagan ended his remarks saying, "Permit me to close on a personal note with a few thoughts from my heart. You know, hardly a day goes by that I'm not told, sometimes in letters, sometimes by people I meet, that they are praying for me. It is a warm but humbling feeling. I know that many of you pray, probably for me and for all our government leaders. Well, I appreciate your prayers more deeply than I can say. I grew up in a home where I was taught to believe in the intercessory prayer. I know it's those prayers and millions like them that are building high and strong the cathedral of freedom that we call America. Those prayers and millions like them that we will always keep our country secure and make her a force for good in this too troubled world. And that's why, as a nation, we must embrace our faith. For as long as we endeavor to be good, and we must believe that will always be, we will find our strength, our hope, and our true happiness in prayer and in the Lord's will. Now I ask, is America one nation under God? We must recognize that America is not a Christian nation, although we should aspire to be a nation whose Christians are admired as good, noble citizens. America is not a shining city on a hill, yet we should let our light of freedom be a shining example to the entire world. America is not the greatest blessing God gave mankind, though it is a great nation worthy of faithfulness. Patriotism has a role, but must not be allowed to expand beyond certain intellectual borders. We are citizens of both the city of God and the city of man, and must always be sure not to confuse one for the other. Americans who attend church only on Christmas and Easter will crowd into pews to sing carols and renew their vague relationship with God. This year, there may be fewer Christians than ever. The Pew Research Center poll revealed that Christians account for 20% of the population, up from 16% in 2008. There was a time when Americans honored the Lord, and he commissioned their nation to welcome all faiths while commanding them to uphold Christian values. But in recent decades, the Supreme Court ruled against prayer in schools, legalized abortion, while politicians declared war on Christmas and bowed to the homosexual lobby. Conservative activists insist that they protest these developments not to defend special privileges for Christianity, but to respect the founders' desire for universal religious liberty rooted in Christian tradition. How accurate is the story of decline into godlessness? Is America supposedly God's last stronghold in the Western world, rejecting faith and endangering religious liberty? America's rates of church affiliation have long been higher than those European countries, yet membership, as every preacher knows, is not the same as showing up on Sunday morning. Rates of Christian attendance have never been as authentic as the Christian rites suggest. Before the Civil War, regular attendance probably never exceeded 30%, rising to a high of 40% around 1965 and declining to under 30% in recent years, even as 77% still identify themselves as Christians. and 69% say they are very or moderately religious, according to a 2012 Gallup survey. Today's spiritual independents are not unprecedented. What is new is their increasing visibility. The religious right's impact on public education in America has been disastrous, whereas most of the developed world strives for accurate science, education, and critical thinking. American school board and administration, so often under the influence of religious activities, will focus on obstructing the evolution of education. Religious conservative leaders have unabashedly declared that their goal is to dismantle public education in America because the pluralist, tolerant values taught in public schools too often contradict their harsh biblical worldview. As such, we shouldn't be surprised that the quality of education has eroded after 3 decades of religious right ascendance. Fortunately, God provides us general revelation, conscience, and wisdom and observation. We must use these tools to make obvious the overlooked connections between secular and religious argument. For instance, we can use logic to show how same-sex marriage affects children and religious liberty, or use practical research to show how family structure influences poverty. It is not enough to be correct in our views, but we must also be persuasive. In closing, during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was purportedly asked if God was on his side, and he replied, "Sir, my concern is not whether God is on our side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God is always right." Thank you, and God bless America.
Even today, the highest court in our land is deliberating over the issue of same-sex marriage, which is an abomination in the sight of our God. Marriage did not come from the state. Marriage came from God. The family was God's first institution. And this country, one of the youngest superpowers on the face of the earth, has been blessed tremendously by Almighty God. But how have we repaid him for his blessings? We have turned away from him. And brothers and sisters, he is not pleased. He speaks and nobody listens. People only listen when E.F. Hutton speaks. When God speaks, very few people listen. I was summoned by him out of my retirement to come back. Never understood it. Had very serious issues with it. As we went through our Bible lesson, he spoke not just to me, but to so many of us who were in the class. And he talked about his work that he does among us, and how he invites us to participate with him in his work. Gave us some examples of what he was talking about, and when I finished going through it, I saw it just as clear as the nose on my face. I've known for many, many years that God was not pleased with what was going on in America. I've known it. That was one of the reasons I wanted to get out of it, because I just didn't want to be bothered with it, because nobody seemed to be listening. Our preachers water down the gospel. They will not preach the true gospel. They will not tell the whole truth. They are too busy trying to build mega ministries and don't have time to disciple people. And that is why I learned one thing in this situation, because I was blaming everybody else. I was blaming the president. I was blaming the congressman. I was blaming the senators. I was blaming everybody. But when I was going through the issue of whether or not I could support the president because of his stance on gay marriage, I prayed to the Lord and asked him to give me a way that I could support him. And the Lord came to me and said, Byrd, the president presides over a democracy of the people, for the people, and by the people. His job is to do the will of the people who elected him. Yes. You preside over a theocracy, and your job is to do my will. The reason the president has to take the stand that he takes is because the church has not done its job. If the church had done his job, then more than 60% of the people in America wouldn't have that mindset. So it's because the church has not done its job that we are in the mess that we are in this country today. That's what the problem is. Because we have not done our job. And so I said, Lord, how do we get out of it? What's our way out? He directed me to 2 Chronicles. He said, it's my people.
Come on.
I'm not talking about the world. I'm not talking about Washington. I'm not talking about Hollywood. I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm talking about my people. My people. I'm talking about the body of Christ. Those who love God, who believe his word. That's who I'm talking about. If they will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven. Brothers, I got to tell you something. Brothers and sisters, I got to tell you. I have to tell you. And listen to this old gray-haired man tell you this. The president can't fix this nation. The Congress, the Senate can't fix this nation. The governors can't fix this nation. The mayors, the city councils can't fix this nation. Police can't fix this nation. If you put 10 police on every block, if people have the mindset that they have, they'll find a way to get through the line. There's only one way this nation can be fixed, and that is God has to release them of that reprobate mind. He said he would. He said he would give them over to a reprobate mind. And you wonder why it's going on in our schools. Our little kids are being killed. Well, they took the Bible out of the school. Yes, sir. The same Bible that every politician put his hand on when he get ready to take a certain office. They took it out of the school. Well, somebody said, well, God wouldn't strike the school. Yes, sir. Say, God wouldn't strike. Do y'all know the same God I know? Yeah, all right. Do y'all know the same God? The same God I know killed everybody on the face of the earth except a few people who was on the ark with Noah. He killed everybody on the face of the earth. He's not just a God of love. He's also a God of wrath. Yes, he is. So he said, if you turn away from me, I will give them over to a reprobate mind. And guess what? This will go on the tape when we go out with our stuff, but the lawyers, I don't know if they need to hear this or not, because it's hard to prosecute a reprobate mind. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can prosecute somebody that's insane. Yes, sir. But a reprobate mind, it would be hard to show that they knew the difference between right and wrong. Reprobate mind. Call right wrong and wrong right. And believe that. That's what they believe. So it would be hard to listen. And an insane person doesn't want to be killed. He doesn't want to be killed. If he could figure out a way to go down to that school and shoot up them kids without getting killed, he might do it. But if he figures he's going to get killed, he ain't going to do that. Because he doesn't want to get killed. It takes a reprobate mind to go down and shoot him up and then get killed himself, because to live or die doesn't make any difference. He doesn't know the difference. A reprobate mind. A reprobate mind. And I'm finished when I tell you, it ain't over yet. It ain't over yet. Unless God's people pray and turn back to him, he's going to turn this nation upside down. You haven't seen nothing yet. So that's why we're here. We're here to throw ourselves on the mercy of the court. That's why we're here. We know we messed up. We know we messed up. We know we messed up. And we're coming to God to say, we know it. And we need you to probably won't do this tomorrow night. I'll do it again. I'm doing it again tonight because some of you weren't here last night. But I'm telling you, if we don't get straight, I'm not talking about getting perfect. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about getting, I'm talking about honoring God. I'm talking about making God the center of our lives. I'm talking about making God the number one on our list. God said, I'm the Lord thy God. I'm a jealous God. Thou shalt have no other God before me. I ain't playing second fiddle for nobody in your life.
That's right.
I've got to be first to nothing. And that's what he's saying to us. God bless you.